I'm going to share a little bit about the context of IFTF Foresight Talks and what you can expect out of today as we go. So yes, so we are here. This is one of a series of talks that we have as part of the IFTF Foresight Essentials group at Institute for the Future. IFTF Foresight Talks is really about how do we grow our community's capabilities in foresight. We really want to explore different futurists. We have futurists and foresight practitioners from around the world, really taking in innovative approaches, and we want to help our community to learn and to grow. And to do that, we have today a wonderful agenda. I'm going to share a few updates about how you can learn foresight with IFTF and some of the new things that are coming up. We have a new class starting next year, so that's very exciting. After that, we're going to be doing what you all came here for, is a conversation with Jason Tester, who is an IFTF research affiliate. And after that, we are going to have a Q&A with the audience. And we like to save a good chunk of time for you all at the end. So who is IFTF? What's IFTF Foresight Essentials? Really what it is, it's a portfolio of trainings that we offer at Institute for the Future that want to empower individuals and teams, organizations, community groups, everybody to really embrace and understand how to use the tools of strategic foresight to not predict the future, as many of you in our community know, but to really engage with the future in a more strategic way. For individuals, we have many different options. We have IFTF Foresight Essentials Online. I'm noticing in the chat we have a few people from our latest course that just finished up last week? Yeah, on Friday. And then we have another one coming up in December and several other dates. We have Design Futures Online, which is for folks who are interested in things like artifacts from the future, which is something that Jason Tester pioneered at IFTF when he was a research director with us. And so you can learn about how do we think about immersive futures and getting through there. We have Futures Thinking on Coursera. I bet a bunch of you have done that. You can audit it for free or get a certificate by paying a monthly fee. And it is a great course taught by Jane McGonigal. And then we have a new course coming up in February. It's going to be the first week of February 2021. It's on alternative future scenarios, and it's based on our post-pandemic work and toolkit that was just released. And it's really going to be a 3-day or 3-session, 3 hours each, really deep dive into that methodology that I know a lot of you are familiar with and interested in learning more about. So if you're interested, please do write to Cindy Baskin. Cindy Baskin, oh, wonderful, we have Jason Tester has joined. So if you'd like to know more, and my colleague Aisha will help in a second, you can email Cindy Baskin, cbaskin@iftf.org to find out about that new course. We also have custom Foresight Essentials online that's pulling from a number of tools from our 22 tool toolkit for teams, as well as we can customize Futures Thinking on Coursera and also work on how leaders make the future. For our larger community, we have these wonderful Foresight Talk webinars that you are part of right now, as well as Ask a Futurist webinars that we had one yesterday on the future of family. We do meetups monthly for people who have completed one of our courses, and then we have a monthly newsletter that's full of amazing tips and tricks of how to engage around futures conversations and what are new tools that are out there. So we are on a Zoom webinar. If you've not been on one yet, which I'm sure many of you have at this point, most of you have, but please feel free as you are doing to introduce yourself in the chat. Note that it's sort of switching that to all panelists and attendees. The default is to just panelists, and we'd love you to introduce yourself to everyone. There's going to be amazing content today, and a lot of today will also be reserved for questions and answer from Jason to you. So please add that in the question and answer section, and then we will be noting your questions there. Please don't do that in the chat. And you are automatically muted and videos are turned off. Now I want to get to the main event. Our guest speaker today is Jason Tester. He is a phenomenal foresight practitioner that's constantly really pushing the edges of foresight and how we have these conversations. He's a researcher, he's a facilitator, he's a designer. He's really looking at cutting edge technologies. How do we think about cultural impacts, social justice? He worked at IFTF as a research director for over 10 years. And now he does freelance work with NGOs, government organizations. As I mentioned before, he really was the pioneer behind IFTF's Artifacts from the Future. Incredible stuff that he does. He's been featured in MSNBC, CNN, Wired, Wall Street Journal, and we are just so lucky to have him with us today. So I want to welcome Jason up to the quote unquote stage and, really kick off our conversation because I want to start off. So I live in San Francisco and if you could pull Jason up, that would be wonderful. And so I live in San Francisco. I know I hear the word queer a lot, but not everybody does know what queer is or queer means. So could you maybe explain that term? I am hoping that we're going to be able to see him soon. Aisha, do you maybe mind unmuting and giving us a bit of a status update on where Jason is?
I think we just lost Jason. He was here and we just lost him, I think.
He just went back down to guest, apparently. So if we could maybe bring things back to bring him back up to panelists as well, that would be really wonderful. Thank you, Aisha.
Great.
Lots of things at once.
Okay, he's panelist now.
Oh, wonderful. Jason, what is queer? And thank you so much. I feel like we've been plagued with technical difficulties in our last 2 times that we've had you at IFTF. I'm so sorry about that. But thrilled to have you here as a yawning cat and soon to be your face. I love this. This is a new feature from Jason. And I'm seeing a frozen cat right now. Hopefully it turns into Jason soon. I see your face. I cannot hear you. You're currently muted, but I'm dying to know what queer means.
Oh, hello. Are we working?
We are working. Hello.
Oh, thank goodness. Wow, this was, my heart is racing a little bit. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining on a Thursday morning. That was a bit of a. What would a queer talk be without a little drama, right? So I appreciate you all joining. I'm going to start to share my screen. Share. And Sarah, could you remind me what your first question to me was?
Yeah, I am just saying, I know what queer is, but not everybody does. What does queer mean? Because I know we're talking about queering the future to save the future. What is queer?
Well, I'll get to that in 1 second. Just a quick, I realized I added this slide, and this explains the genesis of the talk for me. Is that here I am, I'm Jason today. I am pretty damn gay, but I'm also a futurist. So this is me in 2060. So this work and this is really a passion project. It brings together the two parts of my life that have been pretty key for most of my life, being a gay man in a non-gay society, but also being a futurist, and that brings it together. So to your question, what is queer? Well, queer has really two, depending on the part of speech, queer has two distinct meanings. I think most people would use it to say that queer describes the sexual and gender identities other than straight and cisgender. So that includes lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. They may all identify with the word queer. Queer is sometimes used to express that sexuality and gender. It's sometimes used to express that it can be complicated. It can change over time. And it might not fit neatly into either or identities like male, female, or gay or straight. But queer as a verb, and this is where things start to get really interesting. So, and I want to read this because I think this is just a perfect summary of what queer as a verb. Fundamentally, queering is an act of ongoing transformation, both within ourselves and in relation to the world around us. To queer something is to take a look at its foundations and question them. We can explore its limits, its biases, its boundaries. We can look for places where there's elasticity or discover ways we can transform it into something new. To queer is to examine our assumptions and decide which of them we want to keep, change, discard, or play with. So for the purpose of this talk, when I say queer the future and what we're about to get into, it's twofold. For me, queer the future means, in the first meaning, it means to identify the future forces. What are the trends, what are the disruptions, the drivers that will disproportionately disrupt LGBTQ people over the next 30 years? And this is really a call to action to center our lives in foresight research and in futures narratives. But the second one, queer as a verb, I think this is where things start to get really interesting. And this is where this is really relevant to, I think, everyone on the planet, is to examine the future, to examine the complex problems through the lens of the skills and the attributes that make up the queer perspective, or what is kind of commonly considered the queer perspective, to generate new approaches, to just in the way that in the way that trying on a new methodology or a new process can spark new ideas. The queer perspective might actually offer some new approaches to surviving, to thriving, to managing the dilemmas of the future.
Yeah, so, what you're going to be getting into in a bit is more, the concept of queering the future, but how did you arrive at this idea of queering the future in the first place?
Right. Well, and I want to give a plug, if you already haven't, for a lot of my work, which is appearing at queerthefuture.org. I want to turn this into a community, a hub for queer LGBTQ and queer futurists to get together to talk about our collective futures. So I wanted to say, in that first part about what is foresight relevant to LGBTQ people, I wanted to give just a hint of what I'm discovering. So these are two examples right here. We're facing a massive aging boom right now, and we're facing a massive caregiving crisis, a caregiving chasm it's called, where there will not be enough caregivers to take care of all of these seniors and people who need care. So there's a lot of concern that as we think about automated systems, smart homes, robots, for example, will they be LGBTQ friendly? Will they reinforce gender binaries? Will they understand that two people of the same sex, if they've been trained on biased data, can they recognize the nuances of love, and can they actually support a couple aging together? So there are a lot of manifestations of the future that will affect us all, AI, automation. But when seen through an LGBTQ lens, a queer lens, they take on sometimes more dire meanings. And the image on the right is actually also related to AI and machine learning. This was a kind of a cheeky what if proposal of what if we do train a lot of our machine learning and AI systems based on data that really enforces the gender binary. Those AIs are going to really only understand and constantly reinforce the gender binary. This was a person who attached a sensor to a female identified restroom that might actually do a scan to see if the person is biologically was assigned female at birth before they were letting admittance. So there's a lot of issues around technology and its unique impacts on us. So this is an example of that first definition of queer the future that I talked about. What is the foresight that will be really relevant to us? I'm also looking at climate change, migration, really where LGBTQ people are the canaries in the coal mine. But and this is the beginning of what got me worried about the future, is for as much progress as we've made, we're really starting to backslide. We're starting to backslide or stagnate in many countries. In many countries in Africa are among the most intolerant towards LGBTQ people on the planet. I did this calculation before this talk that there are 1.5 billion people living in 72 countries where homosexuality is illegal in 2020. And we know that there are billions more living in countries where it may not be illegal, but is far from, it ranges anywhere from still taboo to discussed in hush-hush tones. And just this year, just over the past year, 1/3 of Polish, what effectively covers 1/3 of Polish territory, declared themselves to be an LGBT-free zone. So progress is not, we often think, at least here in the US, we often think of progress as in civil rights and particularly in LGBT rights as fast, as linear. But globally, that's not always the case. And here's, allow me a leap of faith for a second to actually get to the queerness of this. This was recent research that talked about how it projected which areas of the planet will be too hot for human habitation. I believe this was in the middle part of the sun, towards the middle part of the century. And their findings were that specifically 3.5 billion people will be exposed to mean average temperatures of greater than 29 degrees Celsius. Now, when I hear a number like that, that's a number like that is staggering, right? It's almost too hard to wrap your mind around. But one thing that I've started to do when I hear numbers like this is I take anywhere from 5 to 10%, and we can talk about that in the questions, we can talk about that offline. But specifically, of those 3.5 billion, let's say 10%, 350 million queer people will be exposed to mean average temperatures of greater than 29 degrees Celsius. Now, it is hard enough to be, it is hard enough in many places of the world to be LGBTQ, to live your life with any dignity, with any respect, and even to live your life without fear of violence, without fear of retribution. But to imagine living that as a migrant on the road, away from your home, away from your family, probably without a significant other, without any means of expressing yourself, your true self, that suggests a future that while humanity may be facing a very dire future, I think a lot of LGBT people will be at the bottom of many totem poles. Here's another example. The climate crisis could displace 1.2 billion people by 2050. So again, you can guess what I'm going to do. 1.2 billion times 10%, 120 million queer people could be displaced by climate change. And again, the experience of being in good times, in stable times, the experience of being queer in many parts of the world is far from ideal. But to do that on the road, away from everything you know and love, and your anchors and your sources of comfort and support, is just heartbreaking. Now, unfortunately, I think we're gearing up for. This is a strong thesis weakly held, I would say, as we might say at IFTF. But I think we're facing a half century of mass migration, resource scarcity, and ultimately triage of the remaining water, of the remaining food stocks, of spaces for evacuation after disasters. And in this, when we talk about triage, when we talk about when there are not enough resources to go around, who gets what, I'm really worried that my LGBTQ community does not fare well. That when push comes to shove, when it is every human for themselves, that we are suddenly at much greater risk. So this is kind of the heart of my argument right now, is that I think we have one generation, about 20-ish years, to achieve global LGBTQ respect and dignity, in parentheses, before things get truly dire. And this must be widespread culture equality, not just legal minimums. This must mean that straight neighbor respects gay neighbor, respects queer neighbor. We'll do them a favor if they live next door. We'll help them across the street. This is widespread cultural, if not true acceptance, then at least not a lack of offense over their existence, before we are in a situation where it is every person for themselves, and where we have to work and survive collectively. These are just a few images of queerness, that people will find a way to express queerness wherever they are. These are queer artifacts in a refugee camp in Africa. And I love that queerness. I love the resilience. Of queerness. I love that queerness finds a way to express itself, often no matter the risk. It is people have a sense of identity, of pride that is innate, that is, I think, relatively new, is empowered by movements around the world. But I think we really do have one generation before, pardon my language, the phrase is before shit hits the fan, to actually get this right, so that LGBTQ people and cisgender straight people are on equal footing, and that we may, if we're all going to go extinct, let's go extinct together. But while that's scary enough, I think there could be something even more dangerous on the horizon, something more of an existential threat to queer people. This was a recent study. It was the largest of its kind, and there have been several over the last 10 to 20 years, trying to find a biological or genetic basis for homosexuality. And unfortunately, and this one was really powered by data from direct-to-consumer genetic tests like 23andMe. Now, fortunately for this study, they found that many genes influence same-sex sexuality, there's not a single gay gene. And a lot of people breathe a sigh of relief. Like, as long as there's no one gay gene, then we can't use technologies like CRISPR to edit out that gene. We can't make that gene recessive. We can't deactivate it. But I'm still worried, and I'm still worried for other reasons. There are other theories about how the biological basis for homosexuality, including a relationship and interaction between epigenetic actions and a person's genetic predisposition, such that a person may have a genetic predisposition for homosexuality that is triggered by, according to one thesis, by a hormonal imbalance in the womb. So that would be the epigenetic action. But really, the more important, regardless of whether that is, how plausible that is, I think the fact that we're doing this research, the fact that every year is a new study, is a larger study looking for the biological basis for homosexuality, I think it has to raise the what if. What if an epigenetic or other type of gay vaccine became possible cheaply at population scale? And by vaccine, I mean any pregnant person would be able to take this vaccine, would be able to take a supplement, and either eliminate or greatly minimize the chance that their child will be born anything other than cisgender and straight. Now, I'm of two minds about this. I think there's really the potential to eliminate the suffering of hundreds of millions of LGBTQ people not yet born, especially in regions that are inhospitable to both queer people and or to humans if it gets too hot. Why would I not want people living in such oppressive places to not grow up straight, to not live happy lives? But it got me thinking. And that was a dark thought even for myself, but it got me thinking, but wait, Jason, is there something vital and unique to the queer perspective as it relates to the complexities of any future that we're about to face? And that again kind of got me thinking again, for all of its messiness and marginalization, what if queerness is really close to future ready today? The mindsets, the adaptations we have to make, the skills, the way that queerness has adapted, has been marginalized and has embraced that marginalization. I think a lot of those characteristics are primed not only to thrive and to survive and thrive in the future, but also to see new possibilities that others might not be able to see.
So I don't know about everybody else, but I'm dying to know. I bet they're itching to know. how do you do that? You know, what is queering the future? How does one go about doing this? And this is such a powerful, one comment before is I still remember like the place in the moment when you first shared the emerging sort of thesis about, you know, we have one generation to get people to a place of sort of equality in mind and sort of people not being seen as the other. And that has so stuck with me for such a long time. And it's been so gratifying to see you continue to develop this out in this thesis about this sort of the joy of queering and what does it mean to queer the future. So I'm going to hand it over to you to share a little bit about that. Since we're running a little behind, maybe we'll do maybe a little less of the presentation so we can make sure to leave space open for the questions that are already being asked. So.
Okay. And I already knew this section was going to be fast. I apologize for that.
Apologize, but at the same time, we will be making this recording available for everyone so you can watch it as many times as you want.
So I did want to say, given that this is a Foresight Essential talk, I really wanted to translate, really hone in on what is queering the future as a methodology. If it were to be a methodology, if it were to be a process of becoming more future ready, of generating new, transformative, radical new ideas for what could be, what might that process look like? And how can we borrow from the queer perspective? So that's what we're about to get into right now. All I would ask is, I'm about to give you, I'm about to reveal the secret sauce, if you will, show you what's under the hood of queerness in a way that I don't think a lot of people tend to do, and give you some exercises to actually try to, I call it to try on the queer eye. But I would ask that before you, just as with some products, you can try before you buy. I would ask that if you find these techniques working for you, if you actually find some value, instead of trying before you buy, I would ask that you try before you hire, and specifically hire LGBTQ, non-binary, transgender, and people of color, and all of the above, in multiple identities. Hire them for your futurist teams. Bring them to the table. Not only I hope I'm about to convince you that we are innately good future thinkers, but having more people, having more futures and more future possibilities at the table only makes for richer conversations and really richer outcomes. So there are 6, I'm not sure if we would call them these characteristics of queerness, these steps to queer the future. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. And Sarah, I'm going to trust you to cut me off at some point. So number 1, queering the future centers the margins. And I want to read this quote. For me as a queer person, I reject the words norm, normal, normative, normativity. What do I want to do? I want to destabilize normativity. I want to dismantle and not maintain the status quo. And I think rejecting norms and dismantling the status quo, be it gender or even something as tactical as technology, is what fuels transformative breakthroughs that actually lead to new futures, which is one reason why I think the queer disposition is almost primed as an innovation engine. And rather than being superfluous to change, the margins are in fact where societies and industries grow. That which was once shunned and reframed as a model of innovation, that was once shunned and reframed, is now becomes a model of innovation, a model of ground truth, a model pointing the way forward. I want to give one example for, I have many examples, I want to highlight one, is RuPaul and drag. Drag began in the most marginalized way. Certainly going back to the 50s and 60s in underground clubs, or to the ballroom scene in New York in the 80s. Drag was underground. Drag was on the margins even of gay culture. And look at what happens when we center the margins, when we elevate these voices, expose them to more people, treat them with respect, and bring them into the core and make them a core part of our community. RuPaul now runs a trade show for drag called DragCon, that is in its, I believe, 4th year. It takes place in about 3 cities, London, New York, LA, all around the world. It's seen 650% growth year over year. And to my surprise, only 60% of the audience identifies as LGBTQ and 40% as heterosexual. So centering the margins can actually can benefit everybody. It can cross-fertilize ideas. It can cross-fertilize people that might not otherwise meet or interact or chat. And I think queerness does this really inherently well. So here's the first what I call try the queer eye. And we're not going to pause on these, but feel free to try these on your own. I think the key challenge, the key skill for this is to celebrate and elevate the margins without appropriating them, without stripping them of their context and their credit. And the question I would ask for you is, how can you leverage the originality of the margins while empowering creators and innovators to tell their own stories? I think that involves making a deep and lasting commitment to their communities and giving credit and generously compensating these communities, and being in dialogue with the margins that you wish to learn from, be inspired from, but not use and abuse and appropriate. Number two for queering the future is that I think queerness really embraces deep diversity. A truly just world will not be possible without widespread acceptance of intersectionality and our whole selves. The gifts, talents, and full humanity of many people will be left behind in such a future where we don't face our multiple identities at once. Intersectionality really is, it means that we must understand, acknowledge, and collectively rectify how our multiple identities and whole selves interact with the dominant, often legacy systems of the world, whether as privileged beneficiaries or as compound oppressions. And I'll be the first to admit, this is not, of the 6 skills or the 6 attributes of queerness that I think are future ready, this one, queerness has not always been the most successful here. Queerness has its own issues, has its own issues of racism, of sexism, of ableism, of classism. But we might be farthest along in the journey, because to be queer is to know oppression, and really knowing oppression is a shorter leap to be able to understand other oppressions and to understand other interlocking oppressions. So, for example, in this diagram from a TED Talk from Kimberly Crenshaw, which I really suggest, the originator of the term intersectionality. It suggests that with every multiple identity that we take on, whether we are a person of color, whether we are differently abled, whether we are queer, the world treats us and we are buffered by forces that are that see us not just as one of those characteristics, but as a multitude of people. And in queerness, we need to be able, queerness is pretty good at being able to bring your whole self into a conversation and having that be respected, and having people be able to discuss what their shared experiences in these multiple identities. And I love this phrase. Intersectionality is about fighting discrimination within discrimination, tackling inequalities within inequalities, and protecting minorities within minorities. And when I said that queerness has not always held up the best, it's often been people of color have not always been, their unique needs and have often not always been prioritized or even been heard in the larger LGBTQ movement. And that is something that the movement is still has a long way to go, but is working very quickly to rectify. As a tool to try yourself, I really recommend the intersectionality wheel. And this is really easy to Google. It begins by starting with a person. This could be yourself, a trusted person, maybe a persona of one of your customers or one of your stakeholders, and mapping out their unique characteristics of power, privilege, and identity. Things like their age, their social status, their HIV status, their family status, their immigration status. And then as you zoom out from this wheel, you begin to see what are the forces, what are the biases, what are the oppressions that may be at play depending on how they've answered those questions. Is it racism layered on top of heterosexism, layered on top of transphobia, layered on top of ageism? And then as you zoom out, you see the much larger forces: colonialization, globalization, capitalization, war, a failing an education system that fails many people, immigration, historical forces. Begin to see the very deep forces, and only then can we begin to have a conversation about what are the systems of oppression, and the systems of the world that are unfair, unjust, and inform how people interact with each other, how they make choices, and how they express themselves, and how you as an organization or you as a colleague might be able to better support them. So to try the Queer Eye, this is exactly what I just suggested. For yourself, a trusted partner, or maybe one of your stakeholders, use the wheel to chart your circumstances and then to map these to the dominant systems of oppression and bias that work either for or against them. So how do these compounded injustices inform their choices, their outlooks, and their interactions with you? And how can your organization work to combat these both internally and in the world?
So Jason,
Yeah.
I would suggest maybe we do just one more. We have around 20 minutes left. It is great. We're getting so many comments about how phenomenal it is. And so maybe going through one more and then we'll open it up for questions.
Okay. Allow me to choose the next one, if you will.
Love it.
Thank you. And I'm happy to make this deck available in SlideShare afterwards as well. Okay, this is one that might be a bit surprising, but I think one way to queer the future is to embrace pleasure and joy. And I think queerness has long prioritized feelings of pleasure and joy as indicators of happiness and well-being, not only as indicators of happiness and well-being, but also as essential precursors to unspeakable heights of creativity and uninhibited ideation, really the ability to generate new futures. And this has been almost taboo for a very long time, since queer pleasure was deeply stigmatized when LGBT people fought for respectability and against AIDS. And I want to take a moment to speak about pleasure activism. This is really the organized struggle to prioritize bliss and sensuality, to build individual and collective resistance, and ultimately to create a foundation to conjure better worlds. I want to read this quote from Adrienne Maree Brown, the author of Pleasure Activism. "You're not going to forget the suffering in the world just because you had a great orgasm. You're going to have more resilience for turning and facing that suffering if you're also in touch with the part of life that feels amazing and not just the total catastrophes that are happening." I love that. There's such a reframe from many of our puritanical rooted societies to actually, and this will be a massive project, to reframe pleasure as a form of resilience, pleasure as a form of innovation, I think is lovely. And this quote from one of the seminal texts of queer futurity, I'd like to read it. "Some will say that all we have are the pleasures of this moment, but we must never settle for that minimal transport. We must dream and enact new and better pleasures, other ways of being in the world, and ultimately new worlds." And what strikes me about this quote, we often think about innovation. We often think about the need for something new as a new feature, a new technology, new for newness' sake. Growing an economy, creating a new speciation of products, new differentiation of products. This is an eye-opening for me because it was the first time that I had noticed. My light bulb went off of, what if we actually decided? What if we created new worlds? What if we imagined new worlds based on what new pleasures are possible in those worlds? And I think queerness, by already prioritizing pleasure and joy, almost by definition of queerness, I think queerness is primed to do that, and I think we can all begin to do that. What would it mean to generate new scenarios, new products? Again, not on cost-benefit analysis, not on new features, not on new capabilities, but entirely new pleasures. And the Queer Eye for this one, it's fairly straightforward. How can we help people center sustainable pleasure and joy in their lives? And how can your organization support that shift?
So Jason, there were demands, and first of all, people are thrilled that you're going to be sharing this deck. So thank you so much for offering that. And then there are also requests to see the rest of it. I wanted to ask, I know this is real time, but if you would be willing to actually finish up, so now go back in order.
Sure.
Thanks for playing with it, and be willing to go over. I'd just love for this to, if we were to have the full recording, people can come back also and see the rest of it. And there's some great questions, and I'm wondering if we might do a quick, we can do maybe a recorded me and you Q&A answering that we could post up as well.
And for anyone that can stay late, I can stay late as well. I'll go through these quickly. I think the step number 3 for querying the future is that queerness questions prevailing systems. And I think this is really because that queerness fundamentally exists in opposition to arguably the most prevailing system in the human condition, heterosexual reproduction. I mean, that is, queerness exists almost as in the negative space to that. I think, therefore, the very DNA of queerness is suspicion or outright rejection of norms, orthodoxy, and particularly of continuation futures, of futures that are just the same as we know them to be. Because norms and continuation, in the past, norms and continuation typically kept LGBT queer folks miserable or at worst dead. And having a default mindset, a default stance to question the unquestionable really is, I think it's a prime foundation to readily envision alternative and original ways of doing and being, which is one reason why I think the queer perspective, why I think querying the future is not only a future ready mindset today, but also a great generative mindset for imagining new ways to our most complex problems. I'll go through these. Allow me to skip around a little bit, but I do want to read this quote. Queerness is essentially about the rejection of a here and now, and an insistence on potentiality or concrete possibility for another world. And this is one of the leading queer theorists on what queerness is essentially about. It's about the rejection of the here and now and an insistence that a different world is possible. Queerness rejects binary thinking. So many future forecasts imagine greater fluidity in our identities, our preferences, our self-expression, and our communications and interactions. And I don't disagree. But I think that queerness found comfort with nuance, found comfort with fluidity very early, simply because we've been forced to craft our own alternatives to most institutions in society. And as we crafted those alternatives, I think we were able to shed a lot of the restrictions, a lot of the aspects that caused pain, that caused misery, that made them more fragile. For example, queer adaptations to the binaries of married or single, or of are you family or friend, or even to our most internal compasses of attraction and gender in each moment. Those often began, like all novel futures, if they weren't considered fully deviant, they were considered outliers, if not considered fully deviant, before years and decades pass, and they're seen for their benefits and their relevance and their relative successes. I do not believe I included the example. Oh, well, actually a different example, but I hope people have been following the gender, I won't spend much time on this, but have been following the gender binary explosion, the gender reveal party explosions over the past 2 years. These are where people use smoke and pyrotechnics, either blue or pink, to dramatically reveal to everyone, including themselves, the sex of the baby. Now, these go horribly wrong. This is just a collage of all of the fires, the massive forest fires set by pyrotechnic gender reveal parties. And they've burned hundreds of thousands of acres over the last 2 years. This is a collage of all the people that were hit by projectiles. These were projectile-based gender reveal parties. And unfortunately, the woman in the upper right was killed when the projectile hit that was supposed to reveal the gender of their child hit her in the head and killed her instantly. You can see in the lower left an alligator that was chewing up something, and whether that something revealed pink or blue was to reveal the gender of the child. And as The Atlantic put it, how many more people have to die before we're done with gender reveal parties? I would ask, how many people have to die before we're done with the gender binary? So even though it's a bit of, it's become in the zeitgeist, it's become popular to mock the gender binary, to mock the lengths that people will go there. Queerness got there first, and I think queerness has a real familiarity with nuance, with spectrums, with gray areas and in between. For an exercise here to try the queer eye, I would suggest to do a mapping, do an inventory. What are the binaries in your life that no longer serve you well, or may even be toxic to maintain? And then the second part is that how can you signal to others your willingness and both your willingness and your request for more nuance in how they address you, whether they be pronouns, whether they be questions about your relationship, questions about any aspect of your life that does not fit into their neat categories, nor does it need to. We had pleasure and joy. This is one of my favorites. I think one way to queer the future is to hustle between worlds. And I think queerness really pioneered the rhythm of ad hoc, latent opportunity around every corner, which is essentially the hustle that now defines our work-life blend of freelancing, car sharing, everything on demand if you know where to look. And this goes back for millennia to find companionship, to find work when neither were available to us in mainstream society. Queer folks have been reperceiving and repurposing spaces and platforms to seek their hidden layers, their latent gigs, the underground social networks. When any form or trade of hustling existed on the margins of respectable society, just as queerness had to exist on the margins. And it's only recently has proficiency of the subtle hustle become an admired ability and a more upstanding badge of honor. So essentially, the hustle, you can do a Google image search for hustle, and you will see T-shirts and hats. And hustle is hustle is such a badge of honor now. And yet, for queer people got to that future early, merely out of survival, merely out of a way to find each other, to find work, to survive in a world that was inhospitable to us. I love this quote from futurist Madeline Ashby, who actually did one of these Foresight Essential talks very recently. For a long time, the future has belonged to people who have not had to struggle. I think that will still be true. But as more and more systems collapse, currency, energy, the ability to get water, the ability to work, the future will increasingly belong to those who know how to hustle, and those people who are not the people who are producing those purely optimistic futures. I would not necessarily call queer people pessimists, but I would think given our both our individual, the trauma within our lifetimes, the trauma that we carry with us for millennia, I think we are very much pragmatists. And so I with Madeline, I do trust people who know how to hustle to be future ready, to survive in the future. I'm going to skip this quote, though. In the slides, I really suggest reading this quote from MJ Petroni. It's a quote about why they tend to hire LGBTQ and queer people for their roles. And the gist is that those people have such experience navigating between worlds, passing back and forth between worlds, picking up the lingo, code switching, adapting themselves, that they pick up the nuances, they pick up the culture they pick up a new culture so much easier and so much more intuitively. This is one of my favorite how-to or suggestions to try the queer eye. I think every system has formal transactions and informal hustles. So my question is, what value is exchanged in your organizations, for example, hustle economy? And I'm going to guarantee that you do have one. And remember that hustles, unofficial networks, and off-the-book gigs, they can drain from a system, or they can lubricate it with texture and life. or both. So I would love, I think this is a great exercise to figure out what are the hustles in your organization, what's the informal economy, and map that out. And I can actually end right here. This was one of my this is one of my favorite photo collages. These were photos both taken in the Castro district, the gay district of San Francisco, 42 years apart. And to me, it really just shows that queer folks have always known that we are in the future. We have had setbacks for centuries, for millennia, AIDS, for example, but we have a very strong sense of the future, that we belong in the future. And that's what excites me that's what excites me to share these aspects of queerness with others, because I think you don't have to be queer to understand, I think, a lot of the lessons that we have had to learn the hard way, that make us future ready and that prime us for a future that will be much more complex, ambiguous, and a bit scary. We've been there, we got this. And if we take care of each other, queerness can help out.
Thank you so much, Jason. Really phenomenal presentation, phenomenal. I mean, as per usual, you're just bringing such amazing texture and perspective to Foresight and the Futures Thinking community. It's so powerful. Yeah, I was hoping that you could actually, I am going to do some audience questions, but if you could also, so please everyone, know all of this contact info. We'll send that to you as well if you participated. But if you could also just share, Jason, for a second, the next slide, because we're going to go into Q&A and run a bit over. I would love people to still see what is coming up. So folks, you can see the Foresight Talks webpage at iftf.org/Foresight Talks. We have amazing people who have been doing this for a while, and we have incredible ones coming up. Our next Foresight Talk is going to be December 2nd. It is at 9 a.m. Pacific time, same start time as this one. And it's going to be with Arathi Krishnan, who is a strategy and foresight advisor for the UNDP. And it's going to be all about equity and decolonization, transformation at the intersection of aid, policy, and foresight. And so it's incredible. I'm super excited for this talk. We'd love to have you all there. And then also the recording of this talk is going to be up online. We are still continuing right now. I want to ask questions, but just wanted a chance to make sure that people saw that. And again, we have an upcoming class on the first week of February, a new class on alternative futures. So with that, Jason, there have been lots of questions, a lot of enthusiasm. Might make sense to stop sharing your screen so people can just see your wonderful face a little bit clearer. We're still viewing your screen, but wonderful. So yeah, so one of them is almost a request. This comes from Lonnie Brooks. Saying, and this has gotten a lot of upvotes, can we create a manifesto for queering the future that we can put into the hands of educators and policymakers and legislators, maybe a 5 to 10 point platform? Do you think that this is something that would sort of lend itself to that type of thing? And how are you thinking about spreading this way of thinking and the lens of queering the future to broader audiences?
Yeah. My first thought is doing a lot of talks like this. I love the idea of a manifesto. A very good friend spearheaded the effort to mandate inclusion of LGBTQ history in California textbooks, in California elementary and junior high education. That's what also makes me think. That's what makes me think of that is, as much as can we talk about when we discuss history of when we discuss the history of a people, can we discuss their future? It's only dawned on me recently too, actually, that Queer the Future should be not just a research hub, not just a home for my musings, but we should actually create a community of queer futurists. So I think that's my next step. If you'd like to, at queerthefuture.org, you can send me an email, or there's a mailing list. Sign up at the bottom to join our mailing list, and I'll send something out about starting to create that directory, that community of queer futurists very soon.
That's great. And there's been a couple questions about family, actually. One from Julia Childs, one from Marley Magaziner. And apologies if I am messing up people's names. But Julia was wondering about sort of thinking about aging LGBTQ families with children and thinking about starting families. And then the other question from Marley, I think is interesting as well, is how do you bring this into the idea of child rearing, raising kids with a queer perspective that don't necessarily subscribe to the gender binary? Do you have thoughts on, how you might engage communities or anyone from starting and having this perspective from the start?
I will get in trouble for saying this, and I have gotten in trouble for saying this in the past, but I think I am open to queer. I'm open to. I'm getting a text message probably in opposition to what I'm about to say. I think queer should not necessarily be a label that is attached to sexuality or gender identity, as it is today. It's right now, queer is often a proxy for LGBT. And I've given this talk a number of times now, and someone always inevitably asks, can straight people be queer? And if you Google that question, there's a lot of debate and discussion about whether queerness is a mindset, or is queerness is an important and identity label, an important marker of community that's traditionally been marginalized, or can it evolve into a mindset, borrowing from our struggles, borrowing from our adaptations? I'm in that camp. I'm in that camp. I think, and that's why I'm doing talks like this, to deconstruct queerness, to pull back the curtain of queerness, to say these are things, again, often born of by trial by fire, that we have had to. These are our adaptations that we've had to develop to survive. That I think let's not let them go to waste. Let's share them with everyone, as we are all about to be. As we are all about to face a chaotic, complex future. I think there's a lot that we can all share and learn from each other. And I'm sorry, Julie's question, can you repeat that?
I was just thinking about how do we think about, and sorry, it sort of got, it's now in our answered thing. Maybe not, I don't know. So it was about aging LGBTQ families, and how should we be thinking about that, and sort of perspectives on starting families.
Being
I think I might have butchered that question. I don't know.
Yeah, being a 42-year-old childless queer man myself, I am not necessarily in the best position to answer that. I am very worried. I am very worried, and I know many other people are worried about the generation. I mean, the generation that is of boomers, of queer boomers, and even younger, that never had any kids. And kids being often the primary caregivers for aging. So I'm deeply concerned. I'm scared for myself. My heart aches for the isolation, the loneliness I hear about of queer seniors who either have to go back in the closet when to go into an assisted living facility, or just don't have that aspect of their lives, which may have been actually rich and full while they were alive. While they were younger, is gone now. And so I think it may not be a rainbow caregiving robot, as that cheeky cartoon suggested at the beginning, but I think we can do a much better job of connecting, and groups are starting to work on this, on connecting generations to care for each other, to do forms of community socialization, community caregiving, community where younger queers will run errands, will run tasks for their elders who came before them. Those little green shoots of small projects, those excite me.
So I have one more audience question, and then I am going to ask one final question from me before we wrap things up. But Sheila made a comment, Sheila Mulally, Luli. Again, probably shouldn't say people's last names. If anybody tries to pronounce my last name, I promise you would mess it up. Who said that, I'm very worried about us queer folks who had their coming out process interrupted by the COVID-19 lockdown, lasting mental health consequences. And I'm curious what you think your perspective is on how COVID will impact queer futures. If at all.
That's interesting. I mean, I haven't really thought about that from a queer perspective. I guess okay, a few answers are coming to mind. The queer neighborhoods, queer bars are going out of business in droves all across the country, just as many bars and restaurants are. But queer, I mean, the people debate the continued value of a queer neighborhood, of the gayborhood, if you will. But I think there's still power to having places to socialize, places to meet, and to be around, to be in a safe space. And we're losing a lot of those businesses who just can't, as this drags on, as we are in lockdown, are just not surviving. And of course, I'm reading, as I'm sure many people are, about the stunted socialization of young people who would otherwise be dating, would be this is the time our sexuality is also socially informed. Like, we don't entirely know who we are until we interact with other people. We don't know what our label is, what our preferences are, what our spectrums are, until we interact with a range of people, and that's not happening right now. So I think it remains to be seen. I don't think it's having. I think younger people are still coming out as gender non-binary. They're coming out as queer or not heterosexual in numbers that seem to get larger every year, and which is exciting that they feel comfortable to share that. I think that's not going to change, but I think there's going to be a setback for, as I said, for our traditionally gay spaces and our traditional ways of exploring our sexuality through sociality. Yeah.
Actually, I have two questions. So I'm going to sort of crib from S. Said, okay, so I'm a Foresight practitioner. I do not identify as queer. I'm a cis, straight female. And I am super excited, though, to integrate the trying on of the queer perspective in my work. So bringing to the clients that I work with, the exercises that you had, helping them think about the binaries that don't need to exist, bringing that type of stuff in. But then there's this question about, do you think that the queering perspective might lose its nonconformist advantage if eventually it isn't considered marginalized anymore?
That is a great catch-22 in this. That that marginalization has actually driven a lot of these adaptations. Has driven, I think, a lot of these default mindsets and default perspectives that indeed generate the original ideas, that generate the novel solutions that are future ready for a complex, unknowable, constantly changing future. I I'm afraid to say this is not a cop out. I'm afraid to say I don't have a good answer to that. I think in general, I mean, one signal I didn't show was when there was a cover of The Atlantic a couple years ago, and the cover story was, "What can straight couples learn from gay couples?" And included in that article was Dan Savage, who's a gay sex columnist. He came up with a term called monogamish a few years ago, which is one of those, for me, it fits in rejecting the binaries. It's you're mostly monogamous, but some extracurricular activities are acceptable. And so I think that's something that is almost too good. With 50% of marriages ending in divorce, if we can share these otherwise previously transgressive, subversive topics like open relationships, like monogamish, if that can be of benefit to other people, I'm okay sharing that. I'm okay with maybe diluting it for ourselves, if it can help. So yeah, I think I am worried, and that just means that we will have to stay on our toes, and we have to be more transgressive. And I don't want us to be more marginalized, but I do want us to keep pushing the boundaries of what society can and should be, and to model that for people. But I think we can also share our best practices with others when it will be of benefit to them.
Okay, so speaking of best practices, another question, just from this foresight practitioner angle, and approaching this as a cisgender, white, straight, female, wanting to use these things. One of your keys was your things, I'm sorry if I'm messing it up, was basically like incorporating without appropriating. I don't know if I got the exact language. So if I'm wanting to use some of these exercises with clients, how do I do that? How do I not appropriate queerness? Do I say this is from, my queer colleague, Jason Tester? Or, what do I do to make sure that I don't appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So, I mean, really, that was why I first kind of started that section with the try before you buy, try before you hire. I think Lonnie, who actually asked the first question, I think has done some calculations on what percentage of, at least of people as part of the Association of Professional Futurists identifies LGBTQ, and it's very low. And so I think futures, I'm guessing that there are not a lot of professional futurists and professional future reports and scenarios that are being driven by the LGBTQ perspective. So my first answer would really be, I don't think I am giving, in this content, and speaking as one queer man, I am giving license, I'm giving license to try these exercises, possibly crediting me. I'm happy to zoom in and to help set them up or to lead any exercises, but I'm also giving permission to try them on your own. And I think but I would say if there is value, and really I think the try before you buy metaphor is really perfect here. If they're valuable, if they are, bring in voices, bring in greater representation into those conversations about the future. I mean, every different perspective, every different background generates ideas for the future, has different dispositions towards the future, and that can only strengthen the final output. So I would say that for my content, it's not appropriation, unless there is really no game plan to start incorporating queer voices into your work.
That's great. Jason, thank you so much. I just want to sort of reiterate the 6 points that you brought: center the margins, embrace deep diversity, question prevailing systems, reject binary thinking, embrace pleasure and joy, and hustle between worlds. And Thank you for sharing your brilliant mind and time and for bringing this to the world. I know that I've never seen so many gushing comments in our chat the entire time I've been attending these. Really inspirational, really powerful tool for futurists and for other people to start becoming futurists as well. And that's really what we aim to do in our Foresight Talks and with IFTF Foresight Essentials, is give people the tools to start bringing more foresight into your thinking, into the world, and anticipate and sort of engage with the future in a more nuanced way. So I really appreciate your time. I'm glad that we worked through the technical difficulties and that you were able to go over. So thank you for extending that. And thank you everybody for joining. It has been such a pleasure, and we hope to see you at December 4th at our next Foresight Talks webinar. And please go to queerthefuture.org. Is that it? Queerthefuture.org.
And jasonpester@gmail.com to join our queer community.
And December 2nd, I said the wrong date for our next thing. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.